Hi guys, my name is Amish Tripathi and I'm the director of the Nehru Center. The Nehru Center is the cultural wing of the Indian High Commission in the UK, and we've been in existence for many decades, and we organize wonderful events at this very auditorium, which is in Mayfair in central London. Sadly, as you can see, the auditorium is empty. It has been empty since we were all put into lockdown due to the coronavirus pandemic. But what we Indians believe is that the other side of a crisis is an opportunity. And what we have done at the Nehru Center is moved all our events online. So now if you attend our online events, every single seat is a VIP seat. Like you get a front row at our events. No trouble of parking, no trouble of traveling all the way. And most practically all the programs that we would do, like literary discussions and dance performances, musical performances. We are doing them all on our online channels. You can register for our newsletter at our website nehrucenter.org.uk. You don't need to write them down. They will be displayed at the bottom of the screen. You can also come to our Facebook page, which is a verified page, the Nehru Center. You can follow updates on all our events on Twitter as well, the Nehru Center. That's also a verified account. Or you can come to our YouTube channel. Again, the Nehru Center. We are nothing if not consistent. I hope you do come to our online channels and enjoy the events that we're putting up for you. Thank you so much for all your love and support. Namaste. Jai Hind.
Namaste. My name is Amish Tripathi and I'm the director of the Nehru Center. The Nehru Center is a part of the Indian High Commission and we celebrate everything Indian. And one of the distinguishing features of India as a culture is that we are the last surviving goddess worshipping culture. One of the names of the mother goddess in the Indian way is Shakti. Shakti, the very word, also translates as power. That is the way traditional Indian culture has seen the feminine, the sacred feminine, the powerful feminine. It is therefore completely Indian to be celebrating the power of Shakti today. And what we have today is a woman achiever, a remarkable woman achiever who has written a book on another magnificent woman achiever of the yesteryears. So can we call in the woman achiever of today, Lady Kishwar Desai? If you can call her up on stage, please.
Namaste. Thank you so much for inviting me. As always, Avish, it is a delight to be in your company and so wonderful to be at the Nehru Center. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kishwar. And if I may just read out your introduction before we start the program. We are celebrating a book. We're going to be launching a book that you've written, which has been very nicely displayed right behind you. Good marketing. But let me read out your introduction first for our audience here. Lady Kishwar Desai is an award-winning author and playwright who writes both fiction and non-fiction. She worked in television as an anchor and producer for over 20 years before becoming a writer. She is the chairperson of the Arts and Cultural Heritage Trust that set up the world's first partition museum at Town Hall at Amritsar. She has also helped to install the statue of Mahatma Gandhi outside Westminster in the UK. Kishwar is the author of Darling Ji, the true love story of Nargis and Sunil Dutt in 2007. I enjoyed it. Her novel Witness the Night won the Costa First Novel Award in the UK in 2010 and was followed by two others, Origins of Love in 2012 and Sea of Innocence in 2013. The trilogy featuring Simran Singh has since been optioned for a web series. Kishwar's first work of political non-fiction, Jallianwala Bagh, The Real Story in 2018, won critical acclaim and inspired exhibitions on the massacre in India, the UK and New Zealand. She also wrote a play, Manto, which won the TAG Omega Award for Best Play in 1999. And most recently, in 2019, her play Devika Rani, Goddess of the Silver Screen, was successfully staged in venues across India. And now she's out with a book on the same subject. Devika Rani, called The Longest Kiss. Devika Rani was India's first international superstar in the 1930s and 1940s. Regrettably, not enough has been written about her. Lady Kishwar Desai has set right that the historical shortcoming, if you may call it that. But before we get into the conversation on the book itself, if we can have a book launch, Kishwar, we do these online book launches now because we don't get the pleasure of of tearing, wrapping paper, etc. So we made one of that for you. Can we show that up, please?
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So jumping in straight away, Devika Rani is a remarkable figure, a magnificent woman. And shockingly little is known about her in popular culture today. Though at her time, she was India's first international superstar, and she had an association with London, UK itself. In fact, her first film was launched here, called Karma, and in fact, this kiss is from that movie, if I'm not mistaken. So, if you want to tell us what her initial debut was like and what she achieved in those days.
Thank you, Amish. Devika's life, sadly, as I said, has been overshadowed by later events because she did a lot of work in early Indian cinema along with her husband, Himanshu. Himanshu Rai was also, like Devika, a Bengali. They were both in London in the 1920s and met around 1926 when Himanshu was already a star in silent cinema and he was also a producer. We must remember these people because we have forgotten the fact that he was also an actor at the West End. He was well known for that. And she was just a young girl at the time when she met him. But he charmed her. He was a very, very charming person. He charmed her. She was the great grandniece of Rabindranath Tagore and had been growing up in London. Her father was a doctor in St. Thomas's Hospital, not very far from where you're sitting, Amish. And so she was in school in London and in the suburbs, and she has therefore a strong association, had a strong association with London, had a very, very fine British accent as well. And so when the film Karma was made, it was made as a bilingual. It was made both. And this is also, quite amazing because this was one of the first talkies to come out of India. It was not the first, but it was one of the first. It was in 1933. It was a co-production between the UK as well as the Indian producer Himanshu Rai, her husband. Devika was the star of the film, as was Himanshu. And the film itself got amazing reviews. It was launched at Marble Arch. Again, just maybe walking distance from the Nehru Center. You can imagine that this was a balmy evening when this film was launched, and it was cloudy, and yet over 400 people turned out. And these were who? These were lords and ladies and knights and dames, and these were well dressed. The elite of London turns out to see an Indian film called Karma, or at least a film that is being produced, and where the main actors are both, Indians. So I think it was a remarkable event and something that we should remember, because when we get excited about Indian films being shown abroad, we must remember the reviews she got. Oh my God. I mean, they're unforgettable. The critics of that day thought she was the most glorious thing that they had ever seen on the screen, and many of them wanted her to have a Hollywood debut. So this we are talking about in 1933. So an extremely talented woman, very beautiful. She could sing. So even the songs she has sung herself in Karma, and I think she was the highlight. She stole the show. So as a result of that, the moment the film was screened here, she got offers from everywhere. So it is a sad moment sometimes. I think that we have totally forgotten that very, very exciting moment when Devika appeared on screen along with Himanshu. And yes, I'm sure you want to ask me about that kiss.
No, we're a family channel.
Well, they were a married couple, so we can talk about the kiss.
Yeah, that's true.
by the
That's
time
true.
by the time they kissed on screen, perfectly legitimate. By the time they kissed on screen, and this was a kiss that, in fact, Devika herself had written into the script. Most people don't know that
This was
she wrote
this was
the original
this was
script.
before Hindi movies moved to two flowers touching each other.
1933, and this is a film that was shot partly in India, partly in the UK. This was a woman who'd grown up mostly in the West. She didn't understand what was this reticence to kiss. So when Himanshu in the film has been bitten by a snake, and as we in India believe, quite amusingly, I'm sure, is that if someone has a snake bite and is lying there, then another snake has to come and bite that person in order to draw out the poison. So while we are waiting, and the snake charmer is playing his flute and waiting for the snake to come, Devika is very, very passionately in the film as well in love with Himanshu, who is playing a prince that she adores. So she is very worried, and she practically lies on top of him and kisses him. A lot of people thought that this was like quite amazing, and I'm sure a few people were shocked as well to see a sari clad woman lying on top of a guy kissing him very passionately. So everybody thought it was for 5 minutes, and in the quiz programs till today they said it was 5 minutes, 5 minutes, but actually it wasn't. I timed it, and it is a little less than 2 minutes, which is still a pretty passionate kiss. So on screen, I probably still holds the record. And as you know, Amish, sadly, after that, a lot of kissing was banned, not because of this, but because of, as Indians, we felt that we should show two flowers, two birds in the sky, etc.,
Or
etc.
an elephant trumpeting.
Yeah.
That's when it gets serious.
Yeah, exactly. So this was part of the script that she had written, and in fact, so it's very closely linked to Karma, the film, and the film itself, had a very magnificent title because it changed the karma, if you like, of Indian cinema. Because then after this, the couple goes to India. But anyway, that's another story.
We'll come
Yes.
we'll come to that. But one of the things that strikes me is, even I have to admit I haven't seen the movie. I don't know if it's easily
It's
available. Looking at
on
some of
YouTube.
the
Yeah.
okay, so but looking at some of the pictures, etc., that exist, they were clearly very passionately in love. And it wasn't just an on-screen love affair; it was in real life as well. Um, so take us through that, because she had this glittering debut, and there were some challenges in her love life as well.
Yeah, behind that glittering debut, there was a lot of pain, and
Hmm.
nobody knows about it, Amish. And this was for me as a writer a very exciting moment. You know how it is when some historical figure, whether it be cinema or from Indian heritage, in other ways, you come across a piece of information that only you know about. So that was my startling moment when I discovered this bunch of letters which she had written to Svetoslav, describing her life before. This was her second husband,
Hmm.
whom
Hmm.
she met in 1944-45, and whom
Hmm.
she subsequently, of course, married.
Yeah.
At that time, she was a widow. Himanshu had died. But so she was giving him a glimpse into her early life. And
Hmm.
in one of the letters, I realized that, her initial love affair with Himanshu, yes, it was glittering, it was glamorous, he swept her off, but it was also a lot of hard work. Because
Hmm.
remember, producers at that time and till today also don't have that much money to create the kind of cinema that they want to create. So the first thing that happened was even when they started her training and she started working with him, she had to do practically everything. It was a
Yeah.
small team, so she would do the art direction. She was actually studying to be an architect in London, a career she abandoned in order to go with Himanshu and make the kind of silent cinema he was making at that time. So she participated in some of his films as an art director, but she did a lot of stuff. She never got the credit for it.
Yeah.
It just
That's
was a
that's
very
one of the
patriarchal.
things. Yeah, people
Yeah,
just see her as an actress. She wasn't just an
yeah.
actress. I mean, she wrote the screenplay, she art designer. Why didn't she get the credit for it?
It was a very patriarchal society, Amish.
She
It still
sang as
is.
well.
So she sang as well. Singing, she did get the credit, but definitely that was her own voice, and beautifully, she sang beautifully. So we were talking about the challenges. So one of the things which happened because of the shortage of money, when they go to Germany, because the talkies arrived. So silent cinema doesn't have a hope. This is in the 1930s already. The cinema that's doing well are the talkies. So she and Himanshu go to Germany, where he already has some contacts in the studio, but they have no money. So she sells all her jewelry, her beautiful saris, anything because she was the great grandniece of Rabindranath Tagore, remember? So her family did have, some
Well,
heritage material which they had given to her, but she sold practically, she was down to, she writes in those letters, her last pair of stockings, and they used to starve. Sometimes they would starve when there would be no money. So that was one challenge, that she had to sell everything. Then the second challenge that she faced was she discovered that Himanshu already had a child by another woman when she was in Germany, when they were both in Germany. And she was still a very young girl in her early 20s. It must have been a huge challenge for her to deal with it. But Devika had trained herself from a very early age. That's why I find her so remarkable. She trains herself, and that's also in the letters, how she did it at the age of 12 when she's in a boarding school in England, and she's punished for asking for 2 extra eggs because she was hungry. She's locked up, she's given just bread and water that's run by some very strict people. And that's the moment she decides. She writes in the letter, she said, I'm an Indian girl. I have my identity to maintain. I have my dignity to maintain. I will not allow anyone to wreck that. So I will never show my real needs in front of anybody ever again. And she promises herself that, and she maintains that. So even when she is at the age of 20, that she's still protecting herself, protecting her dignity, and she does not go to anyone. She doesn't tell her mother, she doesn't tell anybody. By that time, her father sadly is no more. He was extremely fond of her. And so she's practically on her own. She's cut herself off from her family in order to marry Himanshu, and then discovers that he's had this love affair, not just with one woman, but then there are a bunch of letters which I have, Amish. And God forbid, if any man were to find that, these letters were lying around and his wife discovers them. But so it must have been very hurtful for her to find all these women writing to him, probably asking, why are you not with us anymore, etc. And they start blackmailing him. One or two of them say that, if you don't, and he'd borrowed money, like any good producer. He had gone to anyone he could and borrowed money from them. So she had to deal with all those challenges as well. But by the time they come back to India, there is a different kind of a challenge that awaits them, which is the setting up of this wonderful studio that they
of the
dreamt
series,
about,
yeah.
Bombay Talkies.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, so take me through that, take the audience through that when they actually shifted to India, started Bombay Talkies in then Bombay, today's Mumbai, and that would have been a challenge. It was a brave step. There were opportunities for Hollywood as well. I'm sure could have pursued that. What got them here
Yeah.
into India in those days and setting up Bombay Talkies? And they set up the studio pretty quickly, within a year. If
Very quickly, within a year, they had something like 400 employees, and many of the stars and even the technicians and the directors and the producers that actually created Indian cinema as we know it today were trained in Bombay Talkies. So we must remember that by the time Himanshu came, he had already worked for about 8 years in cinema. So he was one of the more experienced, and this was all experiences that he'd had with foreign technicians. So not only did they come, this was the amazing thing, they managed to persuade a lot of the Germans they'd worked with. Their main director was Franz Osten. He was a German. And similarly, they persuaded other British technicians to come in. They persuaded so many people to join them. uh, Amish, their main desire, and in fact, one of the reasons why initially Devika was reluctant to join cinema was she said that the actresses all came from dubious backgrounds. I mean, we know that what that means. You and I have no problem with
Yeah,
thinking about,
but
women who were early Indian cinema. They did contribute in many ways, but in those days, for a woman
yes.
of a good with a good background to be rubbing shoulders with women who came from from dubious backgrounds,
Yeah.
I would
The
not say what.
Bhadralok,
Yeah,
Bhadralok women
yeah.
would not, in those days, yes.
Yeah, so this was a problem for Devika. So she finally only joined when Himanshu convinced her that he would be able to bring in educated women and
Hmm.
men into Indian cinema so that they could work with the same kind of people that they had got used to working with in the UK. And I won't say she was a snob. She was not a snob because she could work with anybody, as we ultimately find. She works with all kinds of people because they have to keep the studio going. But this was an important part of her, her contract with Himanshu, that the people have to be respectable. And,
Hmm.
it made perfectly good sense to Himanshu because he also needed to bring in investment. This was the first private limited studio that was set up in
Hmm.
Bombay, which had shareholders. And you know what, Amish? I have the minutes of the meetings, of the meetings that took place, and it was very professional. And Sir
Oh.
Chimanlal Setalvad, who was one of our most fine lawyers, in fact, he argued India's case in the
Hmm.
Jallianwala Bagh massacre. So, he was there and he was the chairperson. And he's the guy who gave the first round of funding to, Himanshu and Devika for Bombay Talkies. So, we find the most remarkable figures, mostly Parsi, because he was a
Hmm.
Parsi. So he was able to convince others also to join in, and so you had very respectable people. And Amish, at that time, the Parsis were very close to the British.
Hmm.
So the British governor at that time, everybody in the British administration became extremely, they became sort of patrons of Bombay Talkies one way or the other and supported the venture. So this was very important because we are talking now pre-partition. So this was very much, Bombay was at that time dominated by the British and the British elite. So they had them on their side. Not only that, they even had Sir Richard Temple, who came from a very, very fine lineage. He was on the board of Bombay Talkies. Now, you can't imagine there was a British gentleman. I have to admit that there were rumors then, and I suspected till today that most of these men who came on board were
We're all in love
probably
with Devika Rani.
overwhelmed with Devika, So Devika was a very key ingredient, if you like.
Yeah.
She was very proper, I have to admit. She was very
Yeah.
proper, and she never let any kind of reflection on
Hmm.
any side. But there were rumors. There were always rumors because these guys were besotted. Most of them were besotted by her. But that was very helpful for Himanshu
No,
because
she
then the
was.
money kept rolling in, and she was also a beautiful woman. So he got a package of 2 or 3 or 4 in one. She was a singer, she was an art director, she could attract the right amount of investment. And that's how they very quickly set up Bombay Talkies in Malad. Amish, it is very sad. You go there, as I did during the course of my research, and the
Hmm.
building, beautiful bungalow, really a beautiful bungalow, which became their studio, and around that were these many houses in which people used to live. The actors and everybody lived together. They ate together in the canteen. Everyone, right from the pier into the. So it was a very egalitarian setup, but it's completely in ruins. So when you talk about what do we do with our legacy and our
Yeah,
heritage, and why do
heritage.
people forget? I was in tears when I went there, because this is a very, very fine, very beautiful, one of our best studios, completely in ruins, totally. It looks like a bhoot bangla, that kind of a thing. So you can imagine these guys set it up, and from day one, their films were a hit because they were
Hmm.
very different to what people were used to. They had storylines because, can I very quickly, I know it's a very long,
Please.
becoming a very long answer, but I
No.
do want to. I do want to introduce one more character into the narrative, which is Niranjan Pal. Niranjan Pal was the son of Bipin Chandra Pal, the famous
Yeah.
freedom fighter.
Lal Pal. Yeah.
And, sorry. Yeah, and he was someone who actually was in London at that time. When Himanshu started his career, he was there. Niranjan Pal was there. He was staying. You must have seen that famous house with Sarwarkar. So he was actually working closely with Sarwarkar on some of the plans that Sarwarkar had to have a violent overthrow of the British in India. And so Niranjan Pal became, because he could not do this anymore. He felt he could not follow the violent path anymore. So he moves away and he becomes a playwright. And that is how he meets Himanshu on the West End in London, and they start working together. And he also comes along as a screenplay writer in Bombay Talkies. So, the London connection is so strong throughout this entire narrative and story. There are Indians who worked there, had very successful careers there, gave it all up to come to India and to set up, this thriving studio, which it was to become.
No, and this studio gave rise to such a powerhouse of talent in those days. Many of those who we look up to as as the finest actors, writers of that era. So Ashok Kumar began his career with this. Take us through that slightly amusing
Okay.
or not
Very,
tragic story of how he became an actor.
yeah, it's a very amusing story, and it's also a slightly sad tale, because we spoke about the challenges that Devika had faced, and so I spoke about some of them. But one of the things which I discovered, which was again a complete shock to me when I was reading these letters exchanged between her and Svetoslav, is that I discovered that she had been suffering from a domestic abuse from Himanshu for many years. Now, he used to. I think maybe he was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. That we find out actually a few years down the line when he does begin to get serious psychiatric help. But I think at that time, when they've just set up Bombay Talkies, and it's not even 2 years, and he's already beating her, and she describes that violence, and it is really heartbreaking because he picks up a script and he hits her so much that she falls to the ground fainting and bleeding, and then he forces her to work even when it is like, she has 105, 100, 104, 105 temperature, and she can barely stand. He treats her so badly that sometimes the domestic help has to come and, push him away with a stick, that you can't beat her anymore. But again, I take you back to her pledge when she was an 11, 12, 13-year-old, and she said, I will keep my dignity. I'm a dignified Indian girl, and I will never allow that image ever to get sullied. So she never spoke about it. But she made a pledge to herself that she would be a total career woman. She would work harder and harder, rise to the top, make herself financially independent. And she also made a pledge to God that, and she used to pray to a saint, and she told him that, look, Saint Anthony, and she told him that, look, please take me away, or let me suffer. As much as you want me to suffer, I will suffer, so long as you give me a reward at the end of it. So she kept very quiet. So it wasn't until I read these letters that I realized that she had been a victim of all this abuse. So around this time, this is only in her second big film that she's doing for Bombay Talkies. She comes across Najmul Hussain, who is a very, very, very handsome young man, and who, like everybody else, possibly is in love with her as well. And so she finds solace with him. And I think because of the treatment she's receiving from Himanshu at that time, she decides to run away with him. And this was, as I said, all this is, I only learned when I started reading these letters. And so she goes away. She doesn't mention that part in her letter that she runs away, but that was known in Bombay Talkies, that she had run away with him to Bombay, from Bombay to Calcutta. She's persuaded to come back. And Amish, for me, this was so amazing. Look at this woman. She runs away in full public view with a guy, with a man, is persuaded to come back, but she still holds her head high, gives a whoppingly great performance in her next film. And and she doesn't let any. So that is the film in which Ashok Kumar makes his debut. Now let me just describe what was Ashok Kumar. Ashok Kumar was this, well, difficult to describe, a very, very nervous technician working in the sound department. And he begs Himanshu. He says, please, please, anything but this. I don't want to act. I don't want to have anything to do with Devika. I don't want to. Because why? They wanted a guy whom she would not be attracted to at all. Or who would be scared of her. So they found this perfect person in Ashok Kumar. So he had a tough time because they forced him to act opposite her. So instead of Devika shivering and being sort of shamefaced in this film, it is Ashok Kumar, who, it's hilarious. You have to see that film. He's literally trembling and shaking. And when he used to see her, he used to come on a cycle to the studio. He would just start cycling desperately in the other direction. So that's why everybody, then he threatened to shave his head off. Yeah, his hair off, because he said that way I won't get a hero's role. So he did everything. In the first scene that he's supposed to play, in the very first scene, he is supposed to jump in through the window to rescue Devika, who's being kidnapped by somebody. The man was so nervous that he jumps in through the window and onto the villain, who actually breaks his leg. So he ends up in hospital, and Devika has to take leave for 3 months because she's so traumatized. So he was like a really nervous, but of course they became, I think they were able to become somewhat good friends. He was still very cautious where she was concerned because he had seen what had happened to poor old Najmul Hussain, whose career just went down the tube. He was never heard of or seen of in important roles again. So that was a big loss to Indian cinema. But Devika managed to, at least inadvertently, create an unforgettable star. And their roles together in very many films, especially Achut Kanya, is really, really memorable.
That was this movie, Achut Kanya.
No. These were early films. Yeah, there's a film.
No,
called,
so which was the film where this thing happened with Ashok Kumar? The benefit, huh?
Jeevan Naya. Yeah.
Jeevan Naya. Jeevan Naya.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it takes break a leg to a different definition altogether.
Yeah. Well, break somebody else's leg, not your own leg. Right. Yeah.
So there was some rumors about how her husband Himanshu Rai died, and even Devika Rani was quite young at that time. So how did she cope with it? If you can take us through that episode of her life.
That was a very traumatic part again for her, because he was a very key. As long as he was alive, she was able to continue with her, work as an actress without having to prove herself in the other roles, the managerial roles, etc. Because they were making 3 films a year. And she was the sole heroine for a long time. She was the only person there making 3 films. So she was exhausted all the time. She had no time to do anything else. So once he died, she realized that her position, in fact, was quite precarious, and she needed to do something about it, because there was another group to which Ashok Kumar also belonged, and Sashadhar Mukherjee, whose family also became very well known in Indian cinema at that time and in later years as well. And Ashok Kumar was his brother-in-law. So it was something which we need to remember, is that it was a very, like I mentioned in the beginning, men. They were just men all around. When I go through the list, as I told you, I have the list of shareholders in Bombay Talkies, shareholders in the managing agents, all of them men. She was the only woman who was attending those meetings. There may be shareholders who were outside, who were not attending meetings, but she was the sole woman attending those managerial meetings, doing things like that. After Himanshu's death, which happened in very mysterious circumstances, it has to be said. She firstly was a bit nervous, because I think since Bombay Talkies was depended on the shareholders, she probably didn't want anyone to know that he was having this severe nervous breakdown. The reason I know this is because I have the hospital bills. So there was a psychiatrist who was treating Himanshu for 3 years. a well-known psychiatrist. You may not like the name very much. He was called Cracky Masani. He was
Cracky.
called cracky because in those days they said cracked if you were
Yeah.
so he used to treat people who were not well, and so he was very impolitely called Cracky Masani.
Cracky.
So but he was very well known. He was a very well known psychiatrist at that
Completely
time.
politically incorrect times.
Very, very incorrect. So he was treating, and also there were other rumors about him, which again I will not go into, but related to maybe some relationships that he had had, etc. But I do know that he was on a very short fuse, because not only was he sort of taking it out on Devika, and there are eyewitnesses as well at that time who have written, if not directly, but indirectly, like Manto, Saadat Hassan Manto, who was there, who talks about some of this in his short stories. And so he was in a bad shape. And in fact, during one shoot, he reacts so badly, he hits a technician on stage so badly across his face, he slaps him, the guy loses his hearing, completely. So you can imagine the kind of violence he was capable of, probably because he's going through this terrible nervous breakdown. And so she takes him away, far away from Malad, to a studio somewhere near Marine Lines, Kolaba, that side, so that probably nobody could identify what his illness was.
For those who don't know, Malad is now deep in North Mumbai, but in those days it would have been almost outside of Mumbai. And Marine Lines
Yeah.
is deep in the south, so it's a far distance away. For those of you who don't know Mumbai, sorry,
Yeah.
please carry on.
So and there was no way for people to go up and down. So she with very quietly secrecy, maintaining all dignity, never telling anybody what exactly was going wrong. She never talked about the violence, never talked about anything. He dies, in these very mysterious circumstances. And you know what? The who's who again turn out for his funeral, because the people who were not there to support him in his last few years, and that's quite evident, who did not stand by him. Another little snippet I want to bring out is that one thing which could have tipped him over the edge. We must remember that World War II was just about, in the middle of it, all of this. And no, it was just about to start, or was already starting. At that time, we must remember that the Germans were working in the studio. So during a shoot, when this thing is going on, and these are very stressful times. Films had to do well in order for the studio to survive. So many employees, etc., etc. The police comes in and arrests all the Germans who are working in the studio, who are the key people. The director, the camera person, etc. They were all Germans. They said they're Nazis, and they dragged them off. From the studio, and they put them in all these camps, which were, it's all in my book, so you'll be able to, so they are taken away. And I think that shocked Himanshu. It was probably the tipping point. He just could not take the stress and strain of being a producer anymore, probably because the people he depended on, like Franz Austin and so on, were all dragged off and shipped off to these camps. And suddenly they had to come up with, luckily they had trained Indians, so there was a kind of a smooth kind of a functioning. So after Himanshu dies, very quickly to go back, she had to really struggle to find her space in the studio, and she had all these people who thought she was just not fit to run the studio. Because why? Because maybe she had run away with a guy, maybe she was not bright enough, but I think most probably because she was a woman.
They tried to take over the company, in fact.
They did.
Sure.
And in fact, there were many ways in which they tried to edge her out, because Sir Chamanlal Setalwad was there, but he also, the shareholders want results, So if somebody comes and tells you, oh, she's not capable of running the studio, she's not capable. So what she does ultimately is that she is able to, through very clever negotiations, which are probably too complicated to explain right now, but through very clever negotiations, she takes over what were the managing agents of Bombay Talkies. And why I know this is because, again, I have all the minutes of the meetings, and how she ousts everybody including a big gun like Sir Chimanlal Setalwal. She literally gives him his marching orders because she decides that he is not on her side, and quickly buys up all his shares so that,
Uh,
he has not a leg to stand on. So it's very, very smartly and all legal, all
mm,
documented, all minuted, so that nobody could later on accuse her of having, done something illegal. So everything was illegal. She takes over the studio and she kicks out everybody. Well, they resign. I think they have no choice but Ashok Kumar and everybody else who were the mainstay of Bombay Talkies. They go off and they set up a rival studio called Filmistan. Is
mm.
Devika worried? No. What does she do? She just gets a whole lot of young people to start working with her again and
Mm.
rebuilds Bombay Talkies. It's quite amazing, the guts she has. And she's a widow by then. She's a
Yeah,
young widow. She's only 32, 33,
when it
34
happens, yeah.
when these things are happening to her. Yeah.
She's very young, and in a world which was very difficult for women, and in
And
those
nobody
days,
to turn to.
nobody
Nobody to
to
turn to. She was on her own.
her ability to pick talent, to spot talent. Uh, that's one of the key hallmarks of a good manager. I mean, think of the ones who emerged from Bombay Talkies. And Dilip Kumar, Raj Kapoor, Madhubala, various technicians as well. What do you think? She was like we're saying once again. She wasn't just an actress. She had an ability to pick. This one is good.
Yes,
Back them and get them to grow. What
totally.
made her into this fantastic manager?
She was just very brilliant. And this is what I think is the saddest part of her narrative, is had she had somebody with her. I mean, I don't know what she would have achieved out of life, because,
Mm.
her, I think, tragedy, if you can call it that, was that she had, which she herself describes as some very incompetent men around her, and she has no respect for them. And you know what she does? I'll describe what she does in one meeting. And Amish, you will love this. So,
Ah,
because I know that you have a little spirit of rebellion in you as well. So you will see her, in her real colors. So she attends this meeting. She's the only woman there.
ah.
In the boardroom, and she's smiling to herself, and everybody's ranting and raving and saying this about her, that about her. And you know what she's doing? She says, I am visualizing that if I put Sir Chimanlal's nose on somebody else, what would he look like? And I put his nose on what would he look like? And this is what she's doing. And when they ask her, she tells them, she says, this is what I'm doing. I'm sitting here and visualizing what you guys will be looking with each other's noses. And after she does that, she decimates them. She just completely says, this is all rubbish. What you're trying to do is all rubbish. This is the way you have to do it. She gives them ideas, suggestions, takes them forward. So she's not some underconfident little thing trying to. But when all the Parsis leave, because when Sir Chimanlal leaves, the Marwaris come in. So then
Mm,
she finds a very different kind of person that she has to deal with. So
mm,
unlike those guys who are much more confident, maybe the Marwaris had never dealt with a woman before,
mm,
in such an important, in those days, I'm saying.
mm,
So for
mm,
them, this was something that they had to get used to,
mm.
but it didn't take long for many of them to fall in love with her, and then everything was fine.
You
Yeah,
describe the
but she kept
moment
them
in the.
at a distance. Let me tell you what she did to
Uh,
one guy. Okay, this guy
uh,
is besotted with her, but he naturally, so he comes and pours his heart out, and she tells Svetoslav, I think he's a bit in love with me. What she does is gives him a gold edged copy of the Gita, like
ah.
signed, just completely takes their relationship to another level, and then discusses the Gita with him, so he doesn't have a leg to stand on.
What a woman. I'm telling you,
What a
one
woman.
can fall in love with her even 70 years later.
Yeah, yeah,
So you
absolutely.
you 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 tell us about you speak of the in the book beautifully of the moment when she met her next husband Rurich.
Svetoslav
Uh,
Rorik, yeah.
take us through that and what that relationship meant to her because it was far more stable. It was she
Yeah.
in a way found
Uh,
home out there.
This was for her. The thing with Devika was because she had achieved everything, in Bombay Talkies. She came in as an actress. She sang, she danced. She then became a producer. Her last role in Bombay Talkies was as sole manager and controller of all productions. So there was
She led
not
a
a single.
boardroom coup. How many
Yeah,
people can lay
totally.
claim to that? She led a
She
boardroom coup.
took over the whole studio, and also was running it. And I've seen the balance sheets, that she was giving them ideas and suggestions how they could refinance the company and then take it forward. But along comes Svetoslav Rorik, and that was a accidental meeting. She's still doing well. She's already, she's still acting, so it's not like she's given up acting. But Svetoslav comes because he's like enchanted with this idea of this beautiful woman. But he comes totally by chance. He comes with Bharti Sarabhai. Bharti Sarabhai is the great Sarabhai who set up all the
Yeah,
scientist,
the one.
his sister. Yeah, his sister. So she comes to the studio with Bharti. He comes with Bharti Sarabhai, and they have a wonderful, wonderful meeting. And they both feel like they've known each other forever. I think Svetoslav had not married. He was a little older than her. I think he was 4 or 5 years older. She was around 36 when they met, 36, 37. With an actress, it's very difficult to know the precise age, but she was about 36, 37. And he was around, 42, 43, something like that. A very well-known artist, comes from this amazing family. The Roriks were aristocrats. Oh my God. They were the white Russians. They'd left before the revolution with all their gold and jewelry very sensibly. And so they had it all in Swiss lockers somewhere or the other. So they were also very wealthy, but they were intellectuals, Amish. This was very important because if you've been to Nagar, where, they had their cottage and where they lived quite simply, if you go there, they were also doing a lot of scientific research, doing treks along the Himalayas, and trying to probe into, the plants and the environment much before now we have studio, Himalayan studies and things like that. Institutions devoted, but they were the first people. They were also very highly spiritual. They were theosophists. There's a theosophical society
Exactly.
in Madras, and so they had followed a lot of other religions. They created their own way of their own lifestyle. So very intellectual family, totally removed from the mayhem that she used to experience every day at Bombay Talkies. And so he comes as this very calm person. Amish, the most important thing is he respects her, you know. So he does not care. She tells him, she says, if I tell you what I've been through, the way I have been brutalized, the way I've been beaten, the scars I have, you will not want to have anything to do with me. And I'm ashamed to say this right now. And he says, I don't care. I really don't care. That's your past. This is your future, and we are in it together. So this is the kind of man who respects no matter. She tells him, she says, do you know, I used to do makeup for old ladies on Bond Street in order to earn money, when pocket money, once upon a time. Doesn't that faze you? And he says, no, it doesn't matter to me at all. I respect career women. I want you to be a working person. So this is something which they have. So they write letters. Now I have to tell you a little bit about the letters, because these are 40-page letters, 20-page letters, without a single word scratched out. I don't know which one of us can still do it. And page upon page upon page of their feelings, of their spiritual connection, of their passion. Yes, there was a lot of that as well. So there's a lot in those letters. There are telegrams flying up and down between Nagar and Bombay, and so that kind of thing. They have to wait a while before they get married, because like the shrewd businesswoman she is, she knows that once a word gets out that she's leaving the studio, her share prices might fall, or she may not be able to get a good price for them.
Good deal.
So she waits till the time when it is appropriate for her to sell her shares, even though Svetoslav is worried and waiting for her to come to Nagar. But so they do get married, and it is actually something she longs for. One of the things she says throughout her life is that she's always been a very simple person, and I can believe that, because I mean, she used to go to the studio from 8 in the morning and stay there till maybe 8 at night. She didn't have a life. I've been through those letters. I've been through. She was there every day. I don't think she ever even took a holiday till Himanshu died. And then, of course, there was this other guy who fell in love with her, and she was looking after him. He had tuberculosis, so she was kind of looking after him and taking him to these spas and things like that. That was the only holiday she probably had, So she was a very, very, very hardworking woman, and I think Svetoslav appreciated that. He was also very hardworking. He's a great artist, but she loved the fact that they were going to be in the country. They were going to be in the hills. They were not going to be, and she loved animals. She loved horses and goats, and and the cows. And some of the letters are just about the horses and the cows. Like she loves that. So she is very happy to become a recluse like he is. They literally becomes a recluse, and that is why I think another reason why she may have been forgotten, because unlike the other actresses who in their 80s 90s we still see them, like Wahida Rehman ji or Asha Parekh ji and all that, she just quit
Disappeared.
at the age of 38. Yeah, at the age of 38 she just quit, and which was in 1946, before partition. And she goes away with him to the hills, and then they go off to Bangalore, where they run again a very successful farm, where the trees are linole. Linole is the main, the oil of that tree is the main ingredient for cosmetics, which is a passion with Devika. And so they run a very successful farm, and people who have been there say that there was just art, and their collections were amazing there. And so she does have a very calm life after she meets Svetoslav, after
She
the
was,
tumultuous life she led. Yeah.
she was no longer the Bengal tigress.
Oh, no, she didn't need to be. She didn't need to be, but sadly, towards the end, of her life, because unfortunately, she may have got a spot of dementia. We don't know, because those years she was being managed by very much, her attendants, who were apparently, there are all these court cases and things like that, stealing all her things, and Svetoslav had died, and so it was a bit of a tragic end for such an amazing and hardworking and strong woman. But unfortunately, your physical body may do something terrible to you, and so I think that happened with her. Yeah.
So if there, we'll pull up some audience questions also. But I had one insight that comes from this book. You don't see her as a victim at
No.
any point of time. Like she faces challenges,
Yeah.
but she fights them. She's a strong woman. She doesn't. You don't see her as a victim anywhere.
No, I don't. I don't. Even towards the end, I would say that when she's been exploited by everybody, she used to still put on all her makeup,
Hmm.
and everything, gold jewelry, makeup, sari, ye wo, and then go out shopping, go here, have tea with people, this that. So even in the last few months, years that she had, when she
Hmm.
was being exploited, treated, probably everything was being stolen, she was still a survivor. That strength was still within her. So this is something which I think a lot of women and men who read
Hmm.
this book, I hope they take away from that, because she was always strategizing. She always thought that how can I make myself better, because she was always learning, eager to learn. She could
Hmm.
work with, as I said initially, she started off by saying that we will only have educated people to work with. But once Bombay Talkies was running, along, then very often they didn't have a choice, and they had to bring in actors who were not well educated, who came from those dubious backgrounds. Did she worry about it? No, she just put her shoulder to the wheel and pressed on. So she had that kind of courage and guts, which I think is very important for us to remember, because this, we're talking about 1920s, 30s, 40s, and
Right.
very few women had those kind of guts. A Meena Kumari turned to alcohol, a Guru Dutt turned to alcohol. I mean, there were men and women who were not being able to take the stress and strain.
Yes,
But she trained herself. She was like, she made herself think her way through. It wasn't as though she couldn't have been in a Me Too situation. There were plenty of men who wanted to, exploit her in that way. And she writes about that in her letters. But she says, I would not give them the chance. I would not have anything to do with them. I would rather work harder in whatever I'm doing than go. I'm not saying that is possible for every woman, but certainly in her case, this is how she led her life. I mean, she had certain strong rules for herself, and she was also very beautiful. So I think she was able to use all her abilities to get to the top. Never a victim. Never ever did she even. There's not a single line in her letters where she feels sorry for herself. Indeed, she feels sorry for Svetoslav. Who are you getting involved with? Run away, before this Bengal tigress does something to you and the world does something. So when somebody is trying to talk Svetoslav out of having a relationship with her, so he said, she asked these questions, a very funny question. So the Congress party will go down the drain if you marry me. Then she'll say the world economy will collapse if you marry me. So she has a very tongue-in-cheek and a strong sense of humor. She doesn't let herself go down. She laughs her way out of it, or she finds a way to deal with the situation.
No, I think that's the thing that stands out the most about this book. Whenever one reads any biography, tries to think what's the message that comes through from this, and the toughness in her. All
Yeah.
of everyone has ups and downs in life. The amount of stress and pain that she suffered, but the strength that she exhibited, the way she fought through life, uh,
All by herself. Yeah.
all by
And so
herself, by herself.
actually very inspirational. So I think,
Very inspirational.
yeah, so definitely that is what I take away, from this. Even the scandalous way, in, for example, her husband dies, but
Mm.
she maintains her dignity and she sails through it. And she ends
Yeah,
up getting all the awards. She gets the
yeah.
Padma Shri, she gets the Dada Saheb Phalke Award. She does. I
Mm.
mean, this woman has done everything.
Mm.
A lot of people would say, ye kabhi mat karna, including running away with another guy who's also a married man, but but she has her dignity and she
Yeah.
maintains that she works so hard at whatever she
Mm.
does. I think she manages to overcome the
A
difficulties.
fighter. A fighter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fighter, the
Mm.
Bengal tigress.
I like that. I like that. I like fighters. Don't see yourself as a
Yeah,
victim. Fight with life.
yeah,
There's a
fight with
question
life.
from
Yeah.
there's a question from Prashant Kumar. What were your challenges while writing this book? Yeah, I got it, right.
Oh my God. I think I need to write a book about the challenges I had. To
Devika Rani is
begin,
still causing stress.
I tell you, well, thank God for COVID, because, even if I was getting stressed, I just had to lock myself into the house and write this book. No, the biggest challenge was the information. Amish, what you said right in the beginning, we are so bad at preserving our history and our heritage. So, as a result of which, she had a very good archive. She had archived everything. For example, the letters that I start the book with, are all letters which are trolling her. They are letters which are written anonymously, calling her names, etc. And she had a file called Anonymous. And in that, she'd kept all the letters, including the ones calling her all kinds of names, etc., etc. वो सब उसके अंदर था. So she was very good at archiving stuff. But unfortunately, this material is now, I won't say where, how, because, people know where it is, don't want to take any names, etc. But it's scattered all over the world. Okay. And it was very, very challenging also, because some of the material, which is even in India, people wanted large amounts of money for me to share the material
Access.
with me. And I think I'm not a millionaire author like you, so I couldn't
Yeah.
just I couldn't afford it. I couldn't afford it. If somebody wants me to pay them 50,000 for an interview, I couldn't afford it. So I thought, as a writer, I need to just now chase. And that's what I did for many years, for 15 years. This is the book. The research began 15 years ago at the National Film Archives of India. And now the book has come out, so it has taken me that long to collect the material, to put snippets together, either. It was very tough, but I have to tell you, I have 2 suitcases, huge suitcases full of notes, material, her letters, interviews, etc., reviews, film reviews, etc. So COVID was a perfect time to open those suitcases and spread the material all over the house. And then I could, sit and it was like a jigsaw puzzle, just piece it all together. It was very, very tough. It was, much like Devika, I would start early in the morning and end up God knows what time. But I was determined that I had to finish the book. One of the things I thought that COVID would give me, not that I had COVID, but one of the things of the lockdown was that I could finish this book,
At the time. Fascinating, fascinating. She's such a magnificent woman. Her story is made for a web series. Are there any plans? The world needs to know this story.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we were very lucky that as soon as the book came out, we got around 15 queries from all over the world. So I have an agent. I don't know much about the world. You know more about these web series. Even the first one for my novels, it was done by my agent. I
Wow.
don't get involved because I really don't know what the money should be and what the deal should be, what the contract should say. So the agent is dealing with it right now, and I think we're fairly close, maybe on one or two of the offers that have come our way. So I do hope. I think she definitely deserves it because
She
as
deserves it.
we've just discussed, there's so many ups and downs. It's like perfect for
Yeah,
a web series or
this
even a
is,
film.
yeah,
Like
this
a
is,
major film. Yeah.
and what a
This
magnificent woman. And what one likes most about her is that she's such a fighter. She's,
fighter. No complaint. No
yeah, yeah,
complaints.
yeah. No
Yeah.
surrendering, no nothing. She'll just keep fighting. Amazing,
Yeah.
magnificent woman,
But
magnificent.
that is probably one of the reasons why we find that so little had been written about her. So that was to come back to the challenges. One was that I couldn't find the archives and I had to go all over the place and all that. The other challenge was whatever was written about her was usually not very complimentary. Because it was usually written by men. And the guys whom she had offended, so by either
Or
telling them that
he was
sure.
lovesick, so he,
They were lovesick, or they wanted to chuck her out of Bombay talkies. So, it was usually written by them. Even a guy like Manto, whom I have great respect for, had very little respect for Devika Rani, because he did not know what was happening behind the scenes, with her, to her, etc. He only wrote about what he saw. So he writes a very thinly veiled sketch in which she's called Latika Rani, and and how terrible she is and what she does to everybody around her. So I was a little taken aback by that because I felt that there are sometimes women, and it still happens if you're a successful career woman, particularly if you're good looking, and you are able to hold your own, and in those cases the patriarchy was very much there, the casting couch was very much there, so if you rejected all of that, you were very likely not only to get trolled, as I said, through those anonymous letters, but also maligned quite a lot. So in any kind of narratives which you find, I mean, publicly, she was celebrated by everybody. I mean, everyone thought she was the most beautiful actress on screen. But in the interviews which are given about Bombay Talkies, she's very, very much maligned. And Himanshu always gets all the sympathy. And he was no doubt a very talented man, but unfortunately, he had his own demons to deal with, which were very clear to me as I wrote this book. Yeah.
and it shows so much more the strength of character of Svetoslav Rorik.
Yeah.
Calm, gentle, thorough gentleman, stable, proper, and perfect foil for her. And I guess she found home with him.
Absolutely. One more thing I want to say is, this happens a lot with strong women. I think in my reading, because I've also been a working woman a lot of times, and I've observed this happening, is that, strong women often become the reason why men like to lean on them a lot. So Svetoslav as well, rather than being this guy whom she could totally rely on, actually he's a very nice person, but in quick succession, he loses his family in different ways. His father dies, his mother also dies a few years later, and his brother goes back to Russia and passes away there. So he's left kind of isolated. He almost stops painting, but Devika is his muse, you know. She, like she did with Himanshu, like she did with a couple of the other guys in her life, she built them up. You know, if she believed in you, she could really, really build you up. And she does that for Svetoslav. So, you know, it is something, but everybody who met her towards the end of her years always felt that there seemed to be some yearning in her still. You know, like something she could have done, something she could have achieved. In my last chapter, I refer to the fact that Tara Ali Beg, you know, the famous, social worker and so on. So she goes to her house in Tataguni in Bangalore and finds that she's a little lost, you know, and she has a wonderful tree outside where she keeps all these devis, you know, that Shakti which you spoke about. You know, there are a lot of devis there that she goes and probably prays to. And honestly, Amish, when I went there, I also felt a strange, you know, Shakti emanating, because the huge tree with those, you know, roots coming down and things, and all these idols placed there. And Tara Ali Beg goes there and she says that when she looked at Devika, and she was saying, so they pray there at that spot. And then she's leaving and she says, I looked at her face and I felt something is missing, you know. Svetoslav is still alive at that time. But, you know, that maybe this woman could have done a lot more. You know, that is the feeling. And that is the feeling I also got when I was, because she was so talented, you know. And so that was the only bit, but she did not regret. No regrets. Anything she did with full gusto, you know. And one more thing, she never ever was leaning on the Tagore heritage. You know, this was another thing I found amazing, you know, in her book. In fact, Rabindranath Tagore comes to meets her in London and also in Germany. I mean, they have some brief encounters, as it were. And he tells her that, you know, come to me and we will, you know, I would like to talk to you and, you know, expand your mind and things like that. But she doesn't pursue that. I mean, she doesn't pursue it because she gets into cinema very quickly. And then after that, pursues that career, you know? Yeah.
Kishwar, what a lovely discussion on what a magnificent woman. I can't wait for this to come out on a series. Before I let you go, if you can tell us what are you working on next? What can we expect from you?
Yeah. Well, yes. I go into too much detail because I'm Amish, you know that you know you want to keep your projects close to your heart. So yes, there is another powerful woman whose story I think I'm getting very much into Shakti. A very interesting woman. Again, an Indo-UK story, and so interesting, you know, that not much again is known about her, not much written about her, even though she was a very prominent figure. And I'm also working on a couple of other novels, you know, which are which are in the very early stages, but basically dealing with what is so close to my heart, the partition and the Jallianwala Bagh and the things which happened before that. So these two novels look at that time very closely. So, but you know, I don't know which book will finish first, but it's kind of fun, you know, to be working on 2 or 3 different projects at the same time. Yeah.
Looking forward to it. Ladies and gentlemen, Lady Kishwar Desai, what an absolute delight and honor to host you. And a lovely book. Do check it out. It is available both in India and the UK. Check it out.
Thank you so much. Namaste. And it was lovely talking to you, Amish. And a big thank you to the Nehru Center, which I love, and its entire team. And we do hope that better times will be here. But do read the book. Thank you. Thank you.